Welcome back to LaunchPod. To play a small part in helping Canadian entrepreneurs weather this storm, we recently launched a series of interactive events featuring tactical advice from startup, investor, and business veterans, leaders who have seen their fair share of challenges and came out on the other side. Today, we're sharing one of those chats with you, a conversation between Joe Canavan, CEO at Next Canada, and Jordan Jacobs, co-founder and managing partner at Radical Ventures. Jordan is a seasoned AI leader and commercialization expert, having co-founded Layer 6, the Vector Institute, and acting as director of CIFAR. Joe and Jordan have a long-standing founder-investor relationship, with Joe acting as an early investor and believer in Layer 6. So take a listen as they explore building VC founder relationships and discuss AI startup opportunities that could be a reality even in today's climate.
This is a unique moment in Canadian history and in human history. And I thought, you know what, if I was going to reach out to somebody, I wanted to reach out to somebody who is a passionate Canadian, a nation builder, somebody who straddles from having been a founder and now a funder through Radical. And as well, in his past life, he was a lawyer, in the entertainment space. He was a TV producer doing really cool stuff, bringing stories from the musical industry to life. And then started a company called Milk. And then he and Tomi Putinen pivoted a little bit to Layer 6. And then Layer 6, which is a really powerful engine for artificial intelligence, and had big customers like the New York Times, which Jordan was featured in this morning, ultimately got acquired by TD Bank a few years ago, which was a phenomenal deal for TD, really gave them an enormous leg up over their competitors. And I'll let Jordan talk a little bit about that. But really, I thought the way that we would maybe start this off is to talk about, Jordan as a founder, somebody who was building a company from the ground up with just an idea and a whole bunch of sketches on a wipeable wall, which I remember so vividly coming to visit. Can you kind of give us your perspective as a founder and what it would feel like going through this type of a crisis and unique time in history?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me, both everyone at Next and everyone who's joined, and you, Joe. So, being a founder is hard all the time. It's particularly hard when you're going through like one of the worst economic and health crises in human history. So, I think founders are kind of built for these kinds of crises in a way. It's in the DNA of a founder to be able to deal with the literally hourly ups and downs of running a business. But this adds a whole other level of complexity. And so I think these kinds of events are great because it gives people a forum to discuss and meet with each other and hear some other perspectives. In our case, we started in 2011, Milk, and the thesis of Milk was to use machine learning, in particular deep learning, to do content discovery of cultural content and personalization of it. So that was really the core underlying difference. The product, you didn't see that in the product. It should have just felt natural. But it's the same tech that YouTube and Netflix and Amazon and so many others use now. Our idea was we're going to start using this, and this was back in 2011, before ImageNet happened, which was the big breakthrough in AI. Jeff Hinton and two of his students won a big competition called ImageNet that Stanford ran. That caused the big flood of people from tech companies scooping up people at University of Toronto who were Jeff's grad students, Jeff Hinton's grad students, and then at all the other universities who are using this technology. So we were ahead of the curve. I remember when I first went and talked to people and explained what we were doing, they just looked at me like I was from space. I had an interest in it, but luckily I had a partner in Tomi who'd actually studied with Jeff in the 90s and used this tech when he was in the West Coast running search at Inktomi and then at Yahoo, and then left and built a company that he sold and became the ranking engine at Bing. So Tomi was very versed in it. What was interesting is when Tomi came back to Canada and we joined forces in 2011, he went back and reconnected with Jeff and found that what was going on here was ahead of what the West Coast big tech companies were doing. And then the world those companies caught up. The truth is, being a founder is really hard. So at the beginning, we bootstrapped. We put our own money in. We walked away. All of us were not kids. I was 39 when we started and walked away from a couple of different very successful businesses I built up. One, a law practice that supported people in media and tech entrepreneurs, and also some people in sports, just because I liked those three things. I also had a media company where I was producing a TV series, and we were managing artists and writers and producers and doing all kinds of different things. So I basically had to walk away from all that stuff and go from a nice income I'd built up to zero, and write a check into the business. And so did Tommy and our third partner, Don. And we hired people. We basically put all the money in, and that was tough to deal with kids and mortgage and all the rest of it. Joe, I don't know if you know, but when Joe came in as an angel investor, when Joe came in, I maybe never told you this at the time, but we were probably about 3 weeks away from being out of money. So
I'm really glad you didn't tell me that. Yeah. I got an here.
I would have maybe found the money somewhere, but Joe catalyzed an angel round that was really important to us at the time and gave us a bunch of runway and allowed us to get the product out and start building partnerships and doing other things. And so, the truth is, being a founder, I think you really have to commit to your vision completely, but you have to be smart about it. And I think the principles of running a business are the same whether you're a startup or a giant company. At the end of the day, you need a product that customers want to pay for. And there's different ways that you can monetize, but somebody ultimately has to pay for you to keep running that business. In a crisis, cash is king. So having a balance sheet that is strong, meaning you've got money in the bank, whether it's from investors or ideally from a product that you're selling, is really important. And I think managing through this is, you've got a lot of things to deal with as a founder. You have to make sure that if you've got accounts receivable out there, you're going collecting as quickly as possible. If you have customers, you want to make sure they renew, and if you have new customers, hopefully they pay. You can get them to pay earlier. But a lot of that gets thrown upside down when you can't meet people in person. You can't pursue sales channels. So all of that stuff, I think, is really a unique and enormous challenge. The way that sales historically happen for tech companies is you have to get in front of people, and you just can't do that now. So I think there's going to be a shift towards companies accepting that a lot of the more sales will, especially larger enterprise sales, will become acceptable to do through things like Zoom. But it's going to take a change in attitude at the buyers. And so we have a whole kind of new way of doing things coming out of this, I think. The other things, though, you need to do are you need to manage your spend. So with all of our companies, we've sat down and gone into very aggressive budgeting exercises. And all of these are companies we've invested in the last 10 months because our fund only launched last May. But we sat down with all of them and went through scenario planning. So what if absolutely no new money comes in? So accounts receivable don't get paid. The sales funnel goes to zero in terms of coming to fruition. None of the money that's owed to us on renewals comes in. And then on the other side, how do we manage our costs? So that's kind of one scenario. The other version of that is this closure doesn't last that long, and we're able to reopen. For some of our businesses, actually, it's accelerated their business because the digital adoption actually just got accelerated because in one of the cases, people can't get into hospitals now. So the hospitals needed to deploy some technology that can give patients access to things digitally that they couldn't otherwise get access to. So there are some businesses that actually benefit from it. But for those that don't, it really is a challenging time. And it's on top of all these other factors, you then got to manage a team that suddenly is not in front of you we're in week 5. So how do you keep people motivated? How do you keep them working? How do you keep the morale up across the organization? All of these things are new challenges that no one has ever had to really deal with before in this way. So it is a very unique time. I think that any company coming out the other side of this, any founder even if their business fails, I think it will make you a much better founder for the next time. My biggest fear is that the companies that do fail, it will be so scarring that those founders will lose their taste for entrepreneurialism and they won't want to do it again. And I would strongly encourage people to think about it as you're getting the best trial by fire that you'll ever have in your lifetime. This is not likely to happen again to this degree and in this way, because even if it does with a virus like this, we'll be more prepared for it. So this is a learning experience that I think that is just totally unique, and hopefully your business can survive it and flourish through it. If it can't, you shouldn't take that as a personal failure. I mean, most tech startups fail anyway. Certainly this doesn't make it any easier. So anyway, that was a long answer to your question about being an entrepreneur, but hopefully some advice from my early days and what we're seeing now.
Well, you know what? You're in a very exclusive club of people that have been out there in a period where you've been out fundraising for a startup. And now, after a successful exit and launching this new vehicle, now you're on the other side of the table. What did you learn from being a founder that you're applying now to Radical Ventures, and how you're allocating funds, and some of the questions that you're asking of founders?
I mean, I think the first, I think there are a bunch of qualities that really benefit founders that turns out are beneficial in anything else you do also. One is persistence. So, I don't know that I have many superpowers. One of them is I'm willing to bang my head against the wall forever. And what that means when you're a founder is that you use that for fundraising, you use that for sales and other things. When you're starting a fund, it's similar. You need to go raise, in our case, $350 million US as a new fund. Like, that's an enormous amount of money. I think someone told us once, it's the second biggest new fund in history in the world. So it's a lot of money to raise for a new institutional organization. And, persistence is just incredibly important. You can't give up. I mean, you just get the door slammed in your face a lot, and you have to take it personally and just refine your game and get better. So that's one thing. Two, adaptability. We had in our startup a pretty hard, I don't want to call it a pivot, but we realized the AI tech we built inside the first business, Milk, was more valuable than the business it was in. And so we decided to split into two companies, pull the AI out and use it. We created the second company, Layer 6, where we would sell the software into enterprises that could use it, that had lots of data and were not great at turning it into value. So banks was actually our first vertical, which was very, very different from what we had been doing in Milk. The underlying tech was the same, but the way we were repurposing it required us to build a whole new software stack around it to be able to deploy into banks on-prem or in any cloud. It was just very different. And it took us about 1.5 years to build the software. So that kind of adaptability is, I think, critical in a time like this. Figure out what the thing is that you've built or that you have that actually matters to people. And maybe it's not your original vision, but if it allows you to stay alive and build a business out of it, focus on that. Go where the interest is for what you're doing. And I think when we look at companies now, we look for those traits. Are they adaptable? Do they learn fast? Are they persistent? The other part of it is obviously huge ambition. So one of the things I like most about what's happened in Toronto and in Canada in the last, since we started in 2011 is, I think there's been this huge momentum in the tech community, and it's largely because younger founders are ambitious, like globally ambitious. Growing up, and I'm, a kid of the 80s, it drove me nuts that I felt like there was a lack of ambition in Canada. And it turned out that a lot of my friends from school ended up being other tech entrepreneurs. We were introduced by Dan DeBow, who's had 3 successful exits now, and a bunch of other friends, David and Nick Stein and others who've been very successful in tech. I was friends with these guys from when I was a kid. And we kind of, I think, we saw the world the same way and were ambitious about it. I think the lack of ambition generally at that point drove me nuts. And I think that has shifted dramatically in Canada now. And that's what is a big part of the momentum in the ecosystem. So obviously having that level of ambition means you're willing to really kind of run through walls and keep going no matter what. Now, having said all that, I don't think people should be crazy. I mean, I don't think you should lose your home or not be able to feed your family in order to support a business which isn't getting traction. So you have to understand where the limits are, but you have to make a lot of sacrifices in this space. So those things, I think, combined ambition, determination, persistence, and adaptability are really critical factors that we look for in companies, and we felt we had. Specifically, in the kinds of companies we look for, we're investing typically in AI companies, like deeply technical companies. So really world-class technical chops is important in our case. We built an impact team that helps support those companies with recruitment. We brought in Aaron Brindle, who's the head of public affairs at Google, who helps our companies with their narrative, which many deep tech companies aren't typically great at. So we try to add some of the things where we think there are holes, but I think those kind of ambition, the vision of what you're doing, persistence, and adaptability are kind of key, the intangibles, I would say. There are other things you need to have as a leader, charisma, that people are going to follow you. There's a lot, you need to know how to read EQ so you can hire people and really connect with them. There's a bunch of things that are just not obvious beyond, does the product work and is it priced right?
So again, you have been a visionary, a leader. You are a founder of the Vector Institute. You're launching this fund, biggest in the world. Can you kind of give all the folks on here an idea of your vision for Canada 5 to 10 years from now? Because you didn't go out and raise all this capital because you thought Canada was going to continue to be a backwater. You see something pretty special here. Yeah.
So for us, everything we've done is kind of fits into one overall narrative, which is that Canada has historically been a resource-funded nation. And those resources, frankly, are declining in importance in the world, oil and paper. And we have very expensive oil. We've seen it already, where Alberta's in fairly dire straits at the moment. We don't think that's a unique point in time. We think that's a trend that is going to accelerate. And one of the challenges we believe is that other oil countries like Saudi Arabia, where it's the government knows they're going to be in power in 30 years, they've started to diversify into tech. And here, because it's multiple elections away when oil is over, no one's really focused on it. So our view is Canada has all the attributes to become a world-leading knowledge economy. We have excellent schools. We have an amazing immigration policy that brings in really talented people and grows the population. And in particular, the leading edge of tech in terms of value creation is AI, and the best people in the world are Canadian. So that, when I was first talking about what we were doing in Milk in 2011, 2012, I would ask people, who are the most influential group of Canadians in the world? And the answers I would always get were like hockey players and like Drake. And I agree, they're fantastic. And I actually call this new ambition in Canada the Drake effect, which I can describe separately. But what we believed was the people who were coming out of Jeff Hinton's lab and Joshua Bengio's lab in Montreal and Rich Sutton's lab in Edmonton, those people were going to be more transformative to the world than any group of Canadians ever before. And we knew them all. And many of them had left. And so for us, the vision of first Vector, first our own company, but then Vector and then the fund was, how do you support transformation of the country to being a world-leading knowledge economy? And we think we can leverage AI to be that place that we jump forward. And then if you do that effectively, you can really influence the world and punch it way above your weight as a country of 36 million people. So the Vector story was, I had this idea that we needed to have a place that was a talent magnet for the very best talent. So they would stay here. They wouldn't leave as they had been. Jeff Hinton's grad students are the heads of AI at Apple, Facebook, Uber, OpenAI, a lot of the leadership at Tesla, DeepMind, Google Brain. They all came from this little lab in Toronto, but they'd all left. And when we asked them why, the answer was there just weren't enough opportunities. I could maybe get a job at U of T as a professor, but that was every couple of years. So the vision for Vector was, you build this place that is a research institute that enables the academics to be both in faculty, work with students, and work in a company. A big company, a small company, but they are not forced to choose, which almost every academic institution to that point had forced the choice. And so many of them had gone into companies because the companies were offering so much money. And that exacerbates the problem of you have even fewer students that are graduating because there's fewer professors to teach them. So that was number one. And number two was we wanted the sponsorship of Vector to be any Canadian company. So the banks came in and insurance companies, Air Canada is a sponsor, Ellis Don, Linamar, also the tech companies Shopify, Thomson Reuters. You could only sponsor if you're a foreign company if you put an AI research group on the ground in Toronto. So not just engineers or marketing or sales, you have to have AI researchers on the ground. And the reason, and we got criticized for this quite a bit, but the idea was simply this. If I'm layer 6 and I'm going to recruit a superstar from DeepMind to Toronto, and this applies anywhere in Canada, same story. But that person's making $1 million a year and they're going to take a big pay cut. They've got a nice house in Wimbledon and kids in private school and a spouse with a job. There's no way they're quitting and moving to a different country if the only job they see out there is the one they're moving to. They have to know that if the job doesn't work out, there's 20 or 50 other jobs and they're going to stay and be able to be supported. And a few years ago, that didn't exist. So the idea of Vector was to be this research center, a large grad school, a center of economic activity in the space that would draw in all these others. And what we've seen now is there are about 40 to 50 big company AI labs, Canadian and non-Canadian, that have coalesced around it. There's 600 AI startups in Toronto, which is the most of any city in the world. And so all of that was happening. And as it was happening, we were growing layer 6 and realized the piece that was still missing was local capital that could be additive. There were some good funds, particularly some funds from Montreal that were here. There are some excellent seed funds, Golden Ventures and others that are here, and version 1 from Vancouver. But there's still per capita just way less capital locally than there is in so many other growing ecosystems. So that was really the thing that made us decide. We were in the middle of a big fundraise in the fall of 2017 for layer 6, which was growing very fast in revenue and customers. And we had our third top 5 tech company come and try and buy us. And they made 5 offers and we kept sending them away. On the 6th offer, I turned to Tommy, who sat beside me at a desk for 9 years. And I said, Tommy, if we don't at least consider why we're saying no, and we go another 6-7 years and we fail, and then we have to explain to our wives why we're moving into the forest in a tent, and we have to say we just turned it down because we didn't have a reason, that won't go over very well. So let's at least have a reason why we're turning down the acquisition offer. And that really led us to, even though we were on quite a fast path to being a unicorn, there was an even bigger opportunity to be a significant VC and support many, many more companies in the ecosystem, allow them to grow here and become giant companies here, and support them through not just the work we do directly with the companies we invest in, but community events and other things that we can deploy into the ecosystem. So that was a bit of the thinking about it. So where we see the country, where I honestly believe this country can be in 10, but certainly 30 years, is one of 3 key pillars of the leading edge tech ecosystems in the world. So Silicon Valley will definitely be one. China will be the other one. We can be the AI and quantum led third ecosystem in Canada. And that, I don't mean just Toronto, Waterloo. I also mean Montreal. I mean kind of across the country. We're too small a country to be competing with each other. And I think we have to think about this from a country perspective. But the quality of people here, the quality of the education system, and the fact that we have an open immigration policy that encourages people to come, while I would say the first 2 choices in the Western world have closed their borders quite a bit, US and UK, we've now become the first choice. And we should, I think, ride that and double down on it. I would massively expand it, the numbers of people that we bring in, and take advantage of this moment in time. So that was a long explanation of our thinking, hopefully made sense.
So I would say, I just want to back that up and say that over the next 10 years, China plans to spend $300+ billion on artificial intelligence. Saudi, 120 billion at last count. Russia at 100 billion because they know their future is very uncertain with energy being the primary revenue driver. And so with us, and I really believe in your mission because we are graduating some of the most talented people on earth from HEC in Montreal, which we partnered with a few years ago with Next AI Montreal because we really believe that can be a center of excellence in our country. In Alberta, you know, Rich Sutton and the team that, and the people he's graduating out of the University of Alberta in Edmonton. It's a hotbed of super bright people, and so many people don't know that Google DeepMind has one office outside a head office in the world, and it's in Edmonton. I mean, it's so impressive. So I love the mission, love what you're doing. I also wanted to expand and say, in a time of crisis like this, and every single crisis in human history has also been a time of massive innovation. What have you seen that is so cool and so innovative? Like one thing that comes to mind is Dyson coming out within 10 days of the crisis hitting the United Kingdom, and he builds a new respirator that he can build 10,000 of in, I think it was like 30 days. That impressed the hell out of me. What do you see?
A lot of really amazing stuff. So first of all, I've gotten pulled in to help coordinate an artificial intelligence response. So part of it just accelerates work that we were doing anyway to access more health data and give it to AI researchers to do things with, to be able to predict disease on a personalized level. With COVID-19, what's happened is the governments have realized we have this enormous wealth of talent and we happen to have a unique single payer, at least at the provincial level, so theoretically single source of data, which means you can hand that information to researchers and do a bunch of different things with it. So there are applications now, it was actually announced on Sunday at the provincial level. They've created this thing called the pt.4 program, which is to collect a lot of the healthcare data, anonymize it, and give it to researchers, which include a bunch of people at Vector, and to do a number of different things. Predict disease outbreak, predict clustering of new cases. So if we want to get the economy back open, how do we do that? Predict the kinds of things that will be healthcare solutions, like medical solutions for this. So which drugs should we try that are developed for other purposes that could be applied here? You know, the first genetic sequencing of the COVID virus was actually done using technology that was invented at Vector. Then there's a whole other piece of it, which is predicting what the best way to open the economy back up is. So what is the most high value job that you put back out into the workforce with the lowest risk to the health system and to that person? And so understanding that allows you to then have a comprehensive plan to open up. So we've been involved in doing both of those things. The amount of work that is being done by those researchers, particularly the ones that I'm dealing with at Vector, but it's researchers across the country, is incredible. So that's one piece of it. On the company side, we're seeing companies do all kinds of different things. So we made an investment in a company that does diagnostic monitoring of patients without being invasive. So it's essentially a device that can sit in a hospital room or at home and monitor people's respiration and other things. The acceleration of the adoption of that into China in particular actually has been amazing. There's a company that we invested in 2 weeks ago that hasn't been, both that one and the one I'm talking about now haven't been announced yet. But the one that we invested in 2 weeks ago, it essentially allows patients to access their digital imagery and share it among from one to another inside a hospital, from one doctor to another, without needing anything physical, which in this environment is critical because you can't get into a hospital, you can't physically do things the way that you could before. So we've seen just a real, this is going to be a moment, I think, that massively accelerates adoption of digital solutions in the healthcare system in particular, but I think really across everything in supply chain. There's a company that another one that we've invested in that's not announced yet, or rather we're about to invest in, so it's not announced yet, that uses AI in robotics. So what's interesting is people are always afraid that robots are going to put people out of work. But there's a big problem right now where migrant labor can't get to farms to farm crops. So crops are literally being pulled off the trees and plowed back under because they can't get them picked and shipped to distribution warehouses. And then from there, they can't get them out because there's not enough labor in the warehouses. So I think you're going to see a very aggressive adoption of robotics to support the food chain, because you have to keep the food chain up no matter what, the food supply chain. And there's a real problem with that now. Even if you could get the migrants in, you can't have the same density because you need to separate them by at least 6 feet. So I think you're going to see robotics be increasingly deployed in a bunch of settings in critical infrastructure like food supply chain and healthcare. And so a lot of companies kind of pivoting toward that. In terms of the bigger companies in Canada, there's a huge number of companies, all the car parts manufacturers, Linamar and others, who are doing things like starting to build ventilators, who switched to creating PPE from a lot of the materials that they otherwise had. So there's been a real shift. I think at the other end of this, one of the other things that we'll see is a lot more domestic manufacturing capability of critical infrastructure, things that are needed in kind of critical infrastructure and supply chain. We're not going to be able to have a situation coming out of this where if this happens with another virus in 5 years, we don't have enough masks for doctors. It's just going to be unacceptable. So, when we get to a vaccine, we don't have enough manufacturing capacity in Canada. And so I think over the next 12, 18 months, we'll see that start to shift as well. There's going to have to be some significant investment to build the capacity so that we don't have to get into a queue to get a vaccine that's manufactured in Switzerland or in China or somewhere, or in India or somewhere else. So I think those are a number of the things that we're seeing already. This really is a moment that I think, we're all kind of concentrating in the weeds and just keeping things afloat and managing our families and making sure our kids are fed. But there's going to be some significant structural changes that come out of this that I think we'll look back in 20 years and say that was the moment it all changed. So I would encourage entrepreneurs, when you have some time, when you're in the shower or wherever else you've got a couple moments, think about the way that the world will look and whether or not this is an opportunity to move there more quickly. I really do think it is in a lot of cases.
Jordan, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for being on the call, and we'll keep doing these to keep you informed and keep you supported in this tricky time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you want to hear the rest of Joe and Jordan's chat, please check it out on our YouTube channel. We'll be back with more stories and resources in the coming weeks, so please tune in or share with a friend.